Kevin, are we ready to go? Right, thank you. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Council, which is the 4th virtual full Council meeting following the introduction of regulations to allow remote meetings in the light of the current coronavirus pandemic. My name is Councillor Wendy Lott, and I am chairing this evening's meeting. I would like to inform everyone that this meeting is being live streamed on the Council's YouTube channel to enable the public to observe the proceedings, and I welcome anyone who is watching. Before we move on to the agenda, I would like to explain how we intend to conduct the meeting. In terms of etiquette for the meeting, can I just remind everyone that they should mute their microphone and turn off the video unless they are speaking. To allow me to manage the meeting, if any member wishes to speak, please indicate by using the raise your hand function on the Teams platform. If you don't have this function, can you either do it verbally, make yourself known that you want to speak by speaking up, or sending a message via the messenger chat. When I call your name, you should turn on your microphone and camera and introduce yourself. As all members have been sent printed copies of the paper, we do not intend to share them on the screen. And for any members of the public who are watching, the agenda pages have been published on the Council's website. At this meeting, Council will consider the Cabinet's proposals in relation to the General Fund budget and resulting estimates of amounts for the Council tax requirements, and an objection to the Cabinet's proposals that has been submitted by the Conservative group. I will first of all request Councillor Glindon to move the Cabinet's proposals, and once those proposals are seconded, I will invite members to ask questions relating only to matters of principle and the Mayor's final amendments that were circulated earlier this week for tonight's meeting. I will then take the objection from the Conservative group. If the objection is approved by the Council, the meeting will end and a further Council meeting will be held on the 4th of March. If the objection is defeated by the Council, I will invite members to debate the Cabinet's proposal and vote on them. I would remind members that regulations are now in force requiring local authorities to have recorded or named votes on any decision at budget meetings relating to the budget or council tax. So we won't be using the raise your hand function on the Teams platform for the purpose of voting at this meeting. Right, agenda item 1. Apologies. I've received one set of apologies from Councillor Wheatman. Do we have any other apologies?
Councillor Samuel has his hand up, Chair.
Right. Councillor Samuel?
I have an apology from Councillor Percy.
Councillor Brockbank?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor McIntyre will be joining us a little bit later, and Councillor Bartoli is having technical issues joining the meeting, but he will be joining us.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Brockbank. Okay, now can we go on?
Chair, can I just say Councillor Percy is in the room.
Hello?
Councillor Percy is in the room, Chair.
Councillor Percy, okay, thank you for that. Right, item 2, declarations of interests and dispensations. The Head of Law and Governance has written to all members to set out the position with regards to interests in meetings of the Council that will deal with the budget proposals. In relation to registrable personal interest held where a member has been appointed by the authority to an outside body or bodies, dispensations have been granted to allow them to participate and vote at any meeting in relation to that registrable personal interest and their membership of that body. Where members have been granted such dispensations, they are not required to declare these registrable personal interests or the grant of dispensations at this meeting. A list of the appointments to the authority's outside bodies and dispensations granted to members in respect of these appointments has been sent to all members. Do any members have any other interest to declare at this meeting? Councillor Cara Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I need to, I've been advised to declare a non-registered interest in the objection received from the Conservative group in relation to a family member being part of their consideration. I'm waiting for the council. I will leave, sorry, Chair, I will leave the meeting as well when we come to that part of the agenda as advised.
Okay, Councillor Burgess. Councillor Harrison. John Harrison.
Thank you, Chair. I have to declare that I have a registrable interest in this meeting and any subsequent budget meetings and shall take no part in the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Harrison. Councillor Oliver.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, it's relating to the adult social care precept. I have a family member who receives adult social care funded by the council. I've taken advice and I am allowed to vote.
Thank you for that. Councillor Brian Burgess.
Thank you, Chair. I've been advised by legal officers to leave the meeting on item 3 because I have a declarable interest there.
Thank you, Councillor Burgess. Councillor Thirlway.
Thanks, Chair. I have two registrable interests. My father works for the local authority and I work for Parkside Care, which has contracts with North Tyneside Council.
Thank you, Councillor Thirlway. Councillor Samuel.
I'm still able to take part in the meeting as I understand it, but I do declare that my wife is an employee of the authority.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel. Councillor Maureen Madden.
Hello, I'd just like to declare an interest. I have a nephew and a niece who work for the local authority.
Thank you for that, Councillor Madden. Councillor Mulvenna.
I declare an interest. I have a brother and a nephew who works for the authority.
Thank you, Councillor Mulvenna. Councillor Drummond.
Thanks, Chair. I work with Tyneside Fire Authority and my wife works for North Tyneside Citizens Advice.
Thank you, Councillor Drummond. Councillor Rankin.
Thank you, Chair. I'll declare a non-registrable personal interest. My wife works for North Tyneside Council. I don't believe there's any budget items that affect her directly, so I will be taking part in the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Councillor Davis.
Thank you, Chair. I have a non-registrable interest. My daughter works for the authority, and I also have a relative that item 3, I'm going to have to stand down for that item. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a non-personal registrable interest as my wife works for energy, but as none of the budget proposals affect the energy, I will still be taking part in the debate.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Brady.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure of the status of whether it's a registrable interest or not, but my business has received support from the business factory during the pandemic, and also a family member has received support during the pandemic too.
Thank you, Councillor Brady. Councillor Gary Madden.
Yeah, but non-registrable interest. I've got a relative that works for the authority. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Councillor Clark, Karen Clark.
Thank you, Chair. I have a, I think it's a registrable interest. I work for an organisation called Justice Prince, and we have a partnership contract with North Tyneside Council. I don't think it's directly related to the budget as such, but just in the terms of clarity. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cruddas.
Hi. Also, I believe a registrable interest. I also work for an organisation called Justice Prince, and we have partnership programmes funded through North Tyneside Council.
Thank you, Councillor Cruddas. Do we have any more registrable or non-registrable interests to declare? No, thank you. Now we'll move on to item 3, which is the Cabinet's proposal. And I will now invite Councillor Glinton to move the Cabinet's proposals. You have up to 10 minutes, Councillor Glinton. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everyone. I'm pleased to formally submit to Council Cabinet's Budget and Council Tax Requirement Resolution for 2021 to 2022. As you all know, we have been developing this budget since last summer. The Our North Tyneside plan sets out policy direction for the use of the council resources, and we have developed the budget proposals in line with those overall set of priorities, but also being mindful of our approach in recovery and supporting our most vulnerable residents in what continues to be a very challenging time. The final local government finance settlement has been issued, although interestingly, we have been advised not to issue our business rates bills until after the Chancellor's budget announcements on the 3rd of March. Additional funding was announced to support the impact of the pandemic into the first quarter of 21-22, and some specific support in respect of dealing with losses on the council tax and business rates this financial year. I want to make some very clear points to Council for you when considering the Cabinet's budget proposals here tonight. Council are well aware of the financial challenges that local government have faced following the financial crash in 2007 to 2008. Preparing this set of budget proposals has been on the back of a sustained period of austerity. Members need to be very clear that the increase in the authority's core spending power set out in the settlement is based on the assumption that the council tax is increased by 4.99%. It also assumes that new houses will continue to be built at the rate of the last few years and that local council tax support will continue to fall. Let me address those issues directly. We've seen since 2016-17 a sustained approach by the Treasury that local government relies on taxation to enable the delivery of key services. This has not changed in 2021-2022. In terms of housing growth, the assumption for next year is based on planning approvals in place. To go beyond that in the current economic climate would be a wrong thing to do and very risky. In terms of council tax support, we have seen an increase in claimants during the pandemic. There's a clear risk that the numbers will continue to rise during 21-22. This will impact on the 22-23 budget setting. This report includes our proposals to support working age claimants by what we mean in the region of 5,800 working age local council tax support residents with the local council tax support liability will not have to pay anything, and a further 4,200 will see their liability reduced. Directing the support to where it is most needed. A key factor Council has to consider in setting this budget is that we must give due consideration of the financial planning horizon, taking on board the advice of the Section 151 officer. There are many known risks that the authority is managing equally. There are significant risks associated with the impact of the pandemic that we cannot express, predict and plan for. This is why we have reserves. Members are well aware of the levels of reserves. We've debated in this chamber before. The level of reserves the Council holds are set out in the Statement of Accounts every year. We have a ring-fence reserve for specific purposes that are earmarked and can only be spent on specific issues. Some of the reserves are in respect of the HRA and can only be spent on the HRA. Some are in relation to schools and can only be spent in relation to school services. The strategic reserve and change reserve are not ring-fenced reserves. The change reserve is there to support major change activity being delivered by the authority. There are a range of major ICT projects we expect will come forward over the next 12 months that will call on that reserve. The projects will include improved digital services and access for our residents. We have demonstrated our approach to financial planning by setting that money aside to support such key areas of investment. The strategic reserve is there to support the authority manage risk in delivering its budget. At 14.4 million, and I'll say that again because there's going to be different figures coming up tonight. It is actually 14.4 million. Currently, this represents just 2.4% of our gross expenditure of the authority. We are a large, complex organisation. This is not a large reserve. Looking ahead, there continues to be a range of uncertainty that we can keep sight of. The key issues include the uncertain future with regards to central government funding and the increased reliance on council tax and business rates to fund services continues. The ongoing financial impact of COVID-19 in relation to the income and expenditure for both the general fund and the housing revenue account on the general fund medium-term financial plan and the HRA 30-year business plan. The sustained pressure both demographically and financially with regard to provision of adult social care services with no sustainable solution being presented by the government currently. The sustained financial pressure with regard to the provision of children's social care services and the authority's ability to achieve efficiency targets identified as becoming increasingly difficult in light of the sustained period of austerity. As part of our budget, we've had to make a difficult decision to increase council tax in line with the government's advice. The government gave us advice, if we want any more money, put the council tax up. This is to ensure that we can continue to deliver the services that residents need and maintain a sustainable financial position for this authority. This budget presented here today includes an overall 1.99% general council tax increase and 3% adult social care precept in line with the government's assumptions. As I mentioned earlier, when talking about the core spending power, members need to remember that when the government considers our funding requirements, it assumes that we will make suggested increase in the council tax, and this will influence future funding needs and assessments. Again, you will know the significance of the business rate income as a source of resources. When assessing the level of income from business rates, consideration is to be given to the total rateable value across the authority. The total rateable value as at January 2021 is just over £150 million. This is only marginally higher than the rateable value in April 2012 that set a baseline for our settlement funding assessment. This shows very clearly that despite the growth in business across the borough, appeals and revaluations have a direct impact on the value of retained business rates for this authority. Valuations and appeals are not something
we have a minute and a half remaining.
Right. Valuations and appeals are something not within our control to manage or influence. Further to that, we are currently seeing 400% increase in the number of the check and challenge appeals, which suggests we will see a further negative impact in rateable values that will have potential long-term impacts on the medium-term financial plan. The spending review announced in November for 21-22, the lack of multi-year in spending review means we are left with a higher level of uncertainty as we carry out our financial planning for a longer term. The outcome of the fair funding review and the move to increase business rates and retention will now be implemented by April 2022, but the timing that could change too. Future years and financial plans are therefore based on a range of assumptions. For example, the assumptions on a continuation of significant areas of funding, which includes Better Care Fund, Improved Better Care Fund. Just to repeat, the authority delivers a vast range of services, resulting in a complex, sometimes volatile budget, which means we have to be in a position to understand and manage the risks associated with the service. We continue to face challenges of maximising the use of available resources to ensure the borough continues to grow reinvestment in essential services continue to be delivered.
Councillor
Achieving
Clinton,
this-
your time's up.
I've got one paragraph. Achieving this balance grows more difficult every year. The long-term impact of the pandemic adding significantly to that uncertainty. I commend this budget to the council and reserve the right to speak.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clinton. Do you have a seconder for this proposal?
Yes, Chair. I'd second this proposal and reserve the right to speak.
Right, thank you, Councillor Pickard. I'll now invite members to ask any questions on the Cabinet's proposals. Members are reminded that they have already had the opportunity to raise questions of a technical nature with officers in advance of this meeting, and can I therefore remind you that questions should relate to matters of principle and repetitious questions should be avoided. Thank you. Do we have any questions? No questions? Okay, if that's no questions, I cannot see any hands raised. Can we now move on to the Conservative?
Chair, if I may, Councillor Brockbank has raised his hand.
Councillor Brockbank.
Sorry, Chair, I'm having technical issues, so please bear with me. I understand, obviously, the issue. We can't ask technical questions. That's absolutely fine. But as a matter of principle, I suppose my question would be: would the elected mayor explain in what circumstances she would use reserves as a one-off activity, to support residents?
I don't think that that's a budget question. That's wait a minute. You want to ask? That's not a question.
I'm asking the principle of what I'm asking the principal, Chair, of under what circumstances does the elected mayor would she consider using unring-fenced reserves?
If I may, Chair, I think that
Councillor Clinton, would you like to come back on that?
Chair, I can come back on that one. They're obviously there to help us at a later date when we haven't got the funding. You know, I think Councillor Brockbank is asking a question which he already knows the answer to.
Thank you, Councillor Clinton. Mr. Roberts, would you like to come in?
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that that would appear to be an almost rhetorical question and not necessarily within the scope of the budget report that's being presented, and therefore it's not something that would be appropriate to debate at this meeting, Chair.
Yes, thanks very much, Mr. Roberts. Thank you. Right, so we'll now move on to the Conservative group's objection. So I'll now invite Councillor Brockbank to move the Conservatives' proposal. You have 10 minutes, Councillor Brockbank.
Thank you very much, Chair, and I'm sure everybody, including the watching public, will appreciate. I'll be brief. I'm proud to present our people's budget. Our proposal starts with the premise that as elected local politicians who are assisted by officers of the council in implementing decisions, it is for us to set the policy agenda and for our officers to set this in motion. Naturally, we value and respect the advice of officers, so this proposal should not be read in any way as anything other than an attempt to deliver a balanced budget which puts the priorities of the people of North Tyneside first. We take our democratic responsibilities very seriously in the Conservative Party and believe passionately that we have a duty to offer the people of this borough an alternative to the Labour Council's financial approach. As such, we have produced a fully costed, balanced and affordable budget which would freeze council tax for every person in North Tyneside. We've consulted widely on this as part of our online presence. We've had over 600 responses to what the Mayor proposes and what we propose, overwhelmingly in favour of our proposals. Council tax is for the delivery of services. It is paid for by the people of the borough. It is not unreasonable for people to expect that their money is used to meet their needs. And at this time of national need, it falls to us to depart from the off-tread path of the budget setting exercise and ask ourselves a key question. What do the people of North Tyneside need? And what do the people of North Tyneside want the most? The Conservative group contends that a freeze in council tax can be achieved as a one-off measure. Now, I'll say that very clearly because I'm sure later on in this meeting there'll be many representations of what I'm saying. So I make it clear to all members, a one-off measure to ease the financial burden on people across our borough by drawing on the reserves, which are unring-fenced, and that means unallocated, and available to spend. Our proposals will keep the unring-fenced reserves well above the recommended level of £10 million, but will deliver the financial respite that people across our borough need. There's been much made of our views and opinions as to how much we have in reserves and how best to use them. Much said also of the need for prudence in financial planning for the future and managing risk. But in our view, not enough has been said about the rights of the people of North Tyneside to see their council deliver their priorities. We recognise that the use of reserves is often resisted, but we pose a very simple question. If reserves are to be used in emergencies, then what exactly is this global pandemic? It is no longer good enough to save for a rainy day, and instead the people of North Tyneside's money should be used to support local people. We acknowledge the professional advice given to us. Indeed, it is their role to offer an administrative perspective, a professional perspective, but our role is to offer policy leadership that responds to people's needs. We do not depart from that advice lightly, but we do so recognising that it is local politicians who must decide the policy agenda and take the tough decisions for our people. Our budget is set against the backdrop of further grants being received very recently to support the work of the council, including the carbon emergency strategy and dealing with domestic abuse. We would achieve the proposed freeze in council tax in savings from the following: acceptance by all councillors that they would take 80% of the allocated allowance available to them in solidarity with workers on furlough. Savings to be made from the disposal of the civic car used by the mayor and other senior figures, which is entirely unneeded during COVID, which people see as an expense too far. The abolition of the council magazine, which Mayor Redfern promised to do when she was first elected. The reduction in the time provided union officials, paid for by council, not the union, by up to 50% to allow for funds to be reallocated to support people's priorities. And the use of the local council tax support grant from central government to freeze tax rises for everyone, and the remaining costs being drawn down from unring-fenced reserves. This is not money that we intend to borrow or reduce essential services. In fact, we match the Labour Party spending plans across the board, including for adult social care. As Lady Thatcher once said to another administration who focused on funds and not folks, we want our money back. We know how tough it is to administer local government. But then when there was a Conservative sat where Mayor Redfern sits now, we achieved a freeze in council tax. It can be done. It requires creative thinking and bold choices so we can deliver what our people want. Finally, our people's budget will freeze council tax, cut councillors' allowances, abolish the chauffeur-driven car. We will not make any further suggestions for savings. It will be paid for with the money that the council already has in the bank. And to be clear, this money does not belong to us, it belongs to the people. I urge every councillor to support this people's budget.
Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. Do you have a seconder for your proposal?
Councillor Bartoli, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to second that and reserve the right to speak, please.
Thank you for that. I now invite members to ask questions of the objection. Do I have any members that wish to ask questions? Right, Councillor Samuel. Oh, Councillor Samuel, your hand was up, now it's down. Councillor Newman?
Yeah, so I didn't have a question. I wish to speak.
Oh, no, it's questions at the moment. Thank you. Councillor Newman.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Fantastic. I just have a couple of questions on the consultation. Could the proposers tell me if they've consulted with any of the council officers prior to presenting this alternative budget?
Yes.
Okay, could you reveal to us the advice that you were given, please?
On what specifically?
Okay, on very specifically, could you tell us if the Section 151 officer has offered any advice about the sustainability of your proposals prior to presenting it to this meeting?
It's not for me to talk to the 151 officer's recommendations. The advice has been given to council in writing. You should be aware of it.
Okay, so am I to assume that you have spoke to the Section 151 officer before proposing this? That's all I'm trying to figure out.
Yes.
Okay, and in 2018, you presented, or
There's
the
a
Conservative
question, Councillor Newman.
It is. You presented a very similar budget, which prompted a very similar response from the Section 151 officer. And I'm wondering, in what way do you believe the Section 151 officer is wrong in that advice?
I'm confused by the premise of your question. I'm not saying that she's wrong. I'm simply saying that this is very different from 2018, very different times, and we're here to set policy. Okay,
very last question, Chair, if I could. So in light of what you've just said, am I right in assuming that you've proposed a budget to this council that you know has been has the potential to risk the financial sustainability of this council? Is that right?
I would simply say that we're in very uncertain times. We have decided to refocus policy on what people have asked us to do and what people want, and a challenge in the council to do things differently. So no, I don't accept that at all.
Right, thank you, Councillor Newman. Councillor Drummond, do you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm just a little bit confused here. Has Councillor Brockbank and the Conservative group actually approached the government for to replace this funding that they say we have? Have they actually written to the government and asked for more money for this council?
Well, Councillor Drummond, it might surprise you, but I don't have a direct line to Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak. But I would say very simply that there has been central government money provided to North Tyneside during the pandemic. It also could be argued that the build-up of reserves is a result of prudent central management as well. So no, I haven't heard from Boris, but certainly our proposals are balanced, they are affordable and can be done.
So you haven't written to them? You haven't written to government, you haven't written to Rishi Sunak to ask for more money for this council?
Have you, Councillor Drummond?
We put many motions through in council. That's not the point.
Have you personally? I think it's a bit of a non-question. It's nonsense to say that I personally have a link to Councillor Boris Johnson or anybody else.
Have the Conservative group written to the government and asked the government for more money for this council, considering it took 127 million away from it?
127 billion? Million. The Conservative group has, over a period of time, made several representations in the forums available to us to central government to maximise both our profile and they raise the issues of delivering for our residents.
Thank you, Councillor Graham.
Thank you,
question, Councillor Graham.
It is a question. Thank you, Councillor Lord. Can I ask Councillor Brockbank, having listened to the first day of the budget scrutiny group and having had the opportunity to ask detailed questions, how you can come to formulate this objection? And further, what will Councillor Brockbank say to the people of North Tyneside if, or should I say when, this authority's Section 151 officer has to apply for a Section 114 notice for bankruptcy? What then would be his response to our residents, given the officer's very detailed advice and Gaudi's opinion that we've received?
Again, Councillor Graham, I think you're slightly living in the past here. That advice was received in very different times when reserves had very different needs and very different focus. I did take part in the meeting you referred to. Councillor Barry was my substitute because I, like many of us, work full time as well. I can't be in two places at once. And I think when I'm explaining to residents what these technical terms you're talking about, including bankruptcy notices and all the rest of it, I would urge you to guard your language. There is no indication at all that our proposals would bankrupt the council. It is absolutely the case that the 151 officer has said that she has issues about the financial sustainability. But again, I say very clearly, this is a one-off, unique situation. We have the reserves to do this. It is obviously her role to guard those reserves as well as she can for future risk. We understand that, but we are here to represent not the officers who do a fantastic job, but the residents, and this is what the residents are asking for. So I would ask also, what would you say to residents when the council tax bill goes up when it doesn't have to?
I will say, because the Tory government are making us do that, but I'd like to come in later with a comment. Thank you, Councillor Lott.
Thank you. Councillor Brockbank, can I ask you to put your video camera on, please, when you're talking?
Sorry, I thought it was.
No, it's not. Councillor Day?
Can you see me now? Sorry, Chair,
yes.
just to check, can you see me now?
Yes. Councillor Day?
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to ask Councillor Brockbank to expand when he talks about one-off use of reserves, what he thinks the impact will be of that.
Well, I appreciate the position is of the 151 officer is that there would be a reduction in unring-fenced reserves. Absolutely, we understand that. We talk, you rightly say, Councillor Day, that we are talking about a one-off and unique situation because we're facing a very unique health pandemic. This wasn't planned, and this wasn't, any of us could predict where we are now. I think the impact would be a reduction in unring-fenced reserves. That's common sense. But again, it would still be above the £10 million that the 151 officer sets as the lower limit for reserve maintenance. So it's a prudent, affordable and costed way forward.
Thank you for your response.
Councillor Thirlaway?
Thanks, Chair. You've made the point that this is a one-off council tax freeze. Assuming your objection is successful and there isn't any council increase this year, will you support a council tax increase in the next year?
Will I support a council tax in the increase in the next year? Sorry, I didn't.
No, assuming that there is no council tax freeze this year in accordance with your objection, in the next financial year after the freeze, will you support a council tax increase, as this is a one-off freeze?
Well, as a Conservative, I believe in financial good management, and I think we would need to see where we are in the future. I'm certainly not tying myself, any future leader, to future commitments. We have voted for increases where we think it's been necessary, but in this particular occasion, we are voting for a freeze because we think it is justified.
But haven't you already haven't you already done that? You tied yourself to the idea that this is a one-off freeze.
This is what, yeah, absolutely. And by the term one-off, I mean we are in a unique position. You're asking me if I had clairvoyance enough to predict what's going to happen next year, then absolutely I would do that. I don't. I'm saying this is something that we don't do lightly. We are doing it as to meet the very unique one-off situation we find ourselves in. Thankfully, the pandemic looks as if it is decreasing, so we won't have to be in this position in future years.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Brockbank. I think he's answered your question, Councillor.
I don't think he has.
Well,
I think I have.
Can we move on, please? I'll now invite members to speak to the objection. Do I have any members that would like to speak to the objection? Right. Can I bring in Councillor Lott, Frank Lott?
Thank you, Chair. I would like to comment on the Conservatives' proposal and also at the time reaffirm something that Councillor Glindon was saying. But I'll begin by saying this is a budget prepared and presented by people who really care about trying to cling to the handful of council seats they hold at the coast. They know full well that this Labour administration under Norma Redfern's leadership is far too responsible to implement these proposals, which would put the council on the road to bankruptcy and being placed in special measures, because that is the inevitable outcome of budgets such as this one, just like the Conservative-controlled Northamptonshire. This isn't the first time the Tynemouth Tories have presented such a budget comprising of a series of one-off savings. In fact, they used to try this one on a regular basis, flying in the face of legal guidance. The legal guidance that we've all received before this meeting and in previous years. advising that we should set budgets with an eye to the future, not just the next 12 months, and that we should consider the implications of this year's budget on subsequent years. Now, in order to explain this so that the Conservative group can understand it, I'll quote from the House of Commons Library explanation of council tax increases. I quote, "The council tax requirement represents an estimate of the amount of council tax that should be raised by a local authority. The Ministry of Housing, Communities and Local Government's assessment of the council tax requirement in the financial settlement documentation is based on two key assumptions. The first is that the council tax base in each authority grows by its average growth over the previous 4 years. The second key assumption is that each local authority raises its council tax rates in line with the maximum allowable level set out in the council tax referendum principles." That's the end of the quote. In other words, freezing the council tax this year would not be taken into account by the MHCLG next year. So if the present trend continues, we would have to make double the savings next year, resulting in much more damaging cuts to services and or an almost double-digit rise in council tax. Labour will not be inflicting such economic harm on the people of this borough. Of course, what the Tories are proposing will make good reading in a pre-election leaflet or a social media message. But when they were in control, they never did any of the things they're suggesting here. Regarding our North Tyneside Residents magazine, it's worth noting that we've already cut costs by reducing to 3 issues a year, and we've reduced the number of pages in each edition. This has brought about a saving of £18,676. The cost for each issue are partly covered by advertising income, on average around £2,500 an edition. That would be lost. We know from our resident survey that the magazine is still the most popular source of information about the council and the services it provides. The majority of residents said that it was their main source of information. And we also do have a legal obligation, a statutorily required requirement to inform our residents. Older residents in particular rely on the magazine for essential information about the council, telephone numbers and things like that. So stopping this magazine would impact disproportionately on our elderly residents. Also, I have to add that this year we've been able to support local businesses through the magazine via our Shop Local campaign, and also offering free advertising at a time when many businesses are struggling to stay afloat.
Councillor, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I could pick up on a number of the points in the budget of one-offs, but there is one that amuses me, and it's regarding removing the civic car. Just imagine if the current chair was invited to the Air Cadet Force Squadron 861 in Wide Open to spend an evening with them, then we'd see her resplendent in the chains of civic office, take the 306 from North Shields, changing to the number 44 bus at Haymarket. And actually this proposal, just put it into context, will save less than 0.001 of a percentage point of the council tax requirement. Actually, less than that if you reclaim bus fares. This is a people's budget in name only. So named because it's when it's in the people's media, it sounds fantastic. But remember, the dictionary definition of fantastic is imaginative or fanciful, remote from reality. And this offering isn't even imaginative. It's just fanciful and remote from reality. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Lott. Can I bring in Councillor Newman?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I can't accept this budget because ultimately it risks the financial sustainability of this council. I believe this budget is filled with half-truths and fundamental mistakes, which in my opinion leads to the conclusion that the proposers of this budget are either incompetent, deliberately deceitful, or it's a budget designed solely for the purpose of producing campaign material for the upcoming mayoral election. And the fact that the proposers have avoided the questions that have been asked to them lends weight to this view. Now, I want to follow this.
Chair, point of order. I'm not going to be called deceitful. Councillor Newman has no evidence of that. That is a disgraceful comment, and I require him to withdraw it.
I will.
And incompetent as well, Chair.
I said that I believe that you're being deliberately deceitful, and I will, or that your budget is designed to supply campaign material. And I'm not saying which one it is, and I'll explain why. If you would give me the courtesy of listening to what I'm going to say, then you can bring that up at the end. So thank you. So I want to focus on the bedrock of this proposal.
Yeah, he also used the words called Councillor Brockbank incompetent. I don't think that's appropriate in the council chamber.
I will answer this afterwards if they would give me the courtesy of listening.
Can you refrain from using defamatory comments, please, Councillor?
No problem. I will apologise if that offended you, and I will retract that part. Okay, so I want to focus very quickly on the bedrock of the proposals, which are the reserves. Now, despite what's been hoyed all over social media, we do not hold £67 million of usable reserves. And it's, as it's been expressed by Councillor Glindon, it's just over 14 million of strategic reserves. Now, put that in perspective, when Northamptonshire Council went bust there last year, they had to use £16 million of their last £16 million of reserves. So it's not a huge amount of reserves for a council of our size. Now, this might explain some of my inflammatory language, which I do apologise for, but this is why I've come to this conclusion that I have questions here. And that is that in regards to using the reserves, the Section 151 officer has circulated her advice previously, and I was asking whether or not they contacted the Section 151 officer before the meeting, but didn't get an answer to that. And it clearly states that this budget would bring in the financial sustainability of the authority. Now, like I said, in 2018, this party produced a remarkably similar budget that suggested using reserves to come up with what to cover a one-off council tax freeze, and that prompted the Section 151 officer to issue a similar statement. Now, it's not conceivable, in my opinion, that the Conservative Party would expect a different response from the Section 151 officer to this budget, and that suggests to me that this budget was submitted deliberately by the Conservatives, knowing full well that it risked the financial sustainability of this council. So the question I ask is, why would the Conservative Party present a budget that they know risked the financial sustainability of this council? I do not accept, if we accept this budget, it will produce a knock-on effect that will last several years. So I'm going to go and ask a further question, and it's a question I put to everybody in this council. Where will we be at the end of that chain? Would we become like Northamptonshire Council, a bankrupt council at the mercy of this immoral and ruthless government? Now, I couldn't put this council or our residents at risk, and I'm very surprised that the Conservatives would propose that we do risk it. It's unreasonable and it's dangerous to expect us to adopt a budget with these risks, because this budget, I believe, as I say, is designed solely for the purpose of producing solely for the purpose of producing material for the upcoming mayor election. I do not believe that it would be right for anybody in this council to accept this budget. Nobody wants to rise wants a council tax rise. Nobody wants to do this. But until the government properly funds local authorities, we are going to be forced to keep doing this. And to make it worse, the group opposite constantly plays petty party politics with this. All the while, they stay silent at the scale of the Conservative cuts to this council. As has been pointed out before, this council has produced many motions calling for more resources for this council, and the Conservatives have never backed them. So where was their concern for the residents when they refused to back these motions? Where was their concern for the people? Their concern was always with their Westminster party. And I come back to what I really object to, and that is that they've tried to call this a people's budget. Okay, a people's budget. It can't be a people's budget. It's Tory party propaganda.
1 minute, Councillor Newman.
I don't believe this budget can be called a people's budget because it's designed solely to produce campaign material for an upcoming election. And it's a cheap political stunt. And I want to go back to one very last fact. The Conservative Party know that this budget risks the financial sustainability of this council. They know that no council could ever accept a budget that risks its financial security, yet they've gone forward and done it. And in my opinion, it's simply because they've either made a massive fundamental mistake or they're trying to develop election material for the election. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Newman. Can I bring in Councillor Graham?
Thank you, Chair. As many of you know, I chair overview and scrutiny and also chair budget scrutiny each year, which is a statutory duty. It's very important to local democracy that there is all-party membership of scrutiny, And when no one came forward from the opposition group, I asked my democratic officer to contact the group again. So 3 days before the group sat on the 17th of December, given this was in the diary for months, 2 members from the opposition agreed to serve. I think this is their civic duty to challenge and to take part. They were told at this meeting about level of reserves being 66 million and that the majority of this reserve was earmarked against projects. The proposal was to hold approximately 15 million, I hear it's 14.4, in the strategic reserve. This is the amount that the Chief Finance Officer, who is also the Section 1551 officer, would be happy to keep in case of unforeseen circumstances like Thunder Thursday, or indeed a pandemic, to set a prudent budget. Councillor Brockbank did attend this first meeting, which was the day of the government settlement, and to my knowledge, he asked no questions. We convened a second time on the 12th of January, once the impact of the settlement was understood, and some other matters were brought forth to that meeting. But Councillor Brockbank is telling us did not attend because he was at work. If he had attended, he would have heard from the Deputy 151 officer that we do not have a choice about to raise or not to raise the additional 4.99% on council tax being imposed by this Conservative government. He has been told this before, as have several of his groups throughout the years, that if we do not raise the proposed in-year rise dictated by government, then this will critically impact a black hole in our finances for years and years to come. And we did talk about this, and this is because of the cumulative effect of this lost income, which is compounded and leads to further financial instability. Indeed, we received a letter in black and white last night from the monitoring officer of the risks, and I quote, "The notice of objection from the Conservative group presents an additional significant risk to the authority's financial position." And it goes on to say, it brings into question the financial sustainability of this council. So if we go down this calamitous route, we end up like Northamptonshire, who've been given permission today to sell their building, with a Section 114 bankruptcy order, and the 12 of the local authorities looking to go down that same hard road, and a damning report backing this up from the Public Accounts Committee. There is also Gaudi's QC opinion that any objection such as this must take into account the longer term financial planning, and not just this year as this objection does. James Gowdy says that the Section 151 officer must consider the adequacy of reserves in the longer term and with due regard to future financial risks, not just for 1 year in a blinkered way. So if we voted for this Conservative proposal, we are risking bankruptcy. I'd like to thank our professional officers for their advice and work, and we value their immeasurably, especially in these uncertain and very difficult times, and we do not know what is around the next corner. We know this Conservative posturing is purely political for their games on social media and headlines for their leaflets. They should be thoroughly ashamed of themselves, taking us down the potential bankruptcy route, having heard what they heard as outlined by our professional team, and I will be voting against this objection. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Graham. I have been made aware that apparently Councillor Barry attended in the absence of Councillor Brockbank.
He did. He did.
Thank
he
you.
Attended.
Right, thank you. Can I bring in Councillor Wallace?
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to support this Conservative budget proposal, which will freeze council tax for all our residents, in sharp contrast with the plans of the elected mayor and the Labour administration, which prefers to continue to impose increases on our residents year after year after year. Our budget shows how a council tax freeze can be achieved to benefit our residents. For many people, council tax is the single biggest monthly payment after their rent and mortgage, and it's a real burden for them. Labour fails to recognise the size of that burden. We propose to stop this burden rising, both by savings and by the use of reserves. With regard to savings, Councillor Frank Lott may choose to rubbish the savings of thousands of pounds, but that's really failing to recognise the thousands of pounds that his residents' hard-earned cash taken from them by council tax. Thousands of pounds may be nothing to Councillor Frank Lott, but to many of our residents, it's a lot of money. And as always, if you look after the pennies, you look after the pounds. With regard to the use of reserves, we of course understand the importance of reserves and actually will take no lessons from Labour about that. Indeed, it was the Conservatives who introduced the concept of a strategic reserve to this council some 20 years ago when, under a previous Labour administration, the council was in an absolutely parlous financial state despite putting up the council tax year after year as they'd always done. This council now holds huge sums in reserves, although Labour are not usually very keen on talking about that. Unring-fenced reserves stand at over £19 million. Our budget will keep the strategic reserve at well over the £10 million, which the council's own policies require and say is needed. We aren't seeking to lower that sum. The figure will remain comfortably above, and thus we are looking at the future stability. With regard to a rise in tax, it is not compulsory to raise council tax by 4.99% this year. It isn't compulsory to impose that rise. Other councils have decided not to do so. Look at Hartlepool, for example. They are freezing their council tax. Look at Hillingdon, which has frozen the council tax for years. It's freezing it again for the elderly, and it's imposing a much, much smaller rise for other people. So it isn't compulsory. That's a complete red herring. I do hope that members will support the Conservative objection tonight and freeze council tax for the benefit of all. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Wallace. Can I bring in Councillor Johnson?
Thank you, Chair. The Conservative budget not only has the potential to bankrupt the council, forcing us to slash services, but it is also morally bankrupt as well. The local council tax support scheme, which allows us to support those households most in need, the poorest households in the borough who have suffered gravely during the pandemic, will be scrapped by this Tory budget. This scheme allows us to reduce the council tax to 6,000 of the poorest households in this borough to zero council tax. And it also takes a significant £150 reduction to another 4,000 of the poorest households. Under the Conservative proposal, that would go. Meanwhile, those most affluent households in the borough stand to gain over £162 per year from their budget. The Conservatives have truly taken from the poor to give to those much fortunate. No one wants to increase council tax. It's certainly not what anybody got involved in the council tax for. But the reality of the situation is the Conservative government have cut £127 million from this council's budget. And every year, while continuing to give us less and less funding and telling us to put up council tax, they are constantly changing the burden for paying for local services from the government on local people claiming austerity. But clearly, there's been no austerity for the billions of pounds in contracts handed to the Tory associates of the government. This Tory budget rates reserves, which would leave a £15 million black hole in the next 5 years. And it's important to remember what raiding the reserves does this year. That money needs to be found next year because the government will assume you have raised council tax. So in their base budget next year, that £3 million will still need to be found. Councillor Brockbank says it's a one-off, but Councillor Brockbank is wrong. It's not a one-off. You need to find that £3 million next year, or you need to cut £3 million worth of services, which would lead to 15 million over the 5 years. It's reckless and it would bankrupt the authority, causing the council to have slash jobs and close services and cancel investment. A budget which puts the most vulnerable in our borough at risk of financial hardship is not a budget that I nor anyone else in this chamber should be able to. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I now bring in Councillor McIntyre, please?
Thank you, Chair. The Conservative People's budget sets out to support the people of North Tyneside, who have just gone through and are still going through a pandemic that has not only isolated and worried many of them, but also put a number of people in a difficult financial situation. The Chancellor has been imaginative in helping businesses with various grants and loans, plus the furlough scheme, and therefore it'd be very irresponsible and damaging if this council could not follow suit and unburden their residents by placing a freeze on council tax. The very small amount of reserves that the Conservative budget proposes to use in order to achieve this freeze is, after all, residents' money, which has been accumulated over the years for such a crisis. Each year, bar one, the reserves have increased. Together with a council tax support grant from the government and some reductions in spending, none of which will affect services, we can freeze council tax.
Can I interrupt you for one moment? Can I ask you to put on your camera, please?
I'm not sure if it's working, but hang on.
Can you try? I think you're there. I can see your light.
Is that on? I can't see.
You're there. Thank you.
Right. Our consultation on people's views regarding freezing council tax has shown that the majority of people who responded are totally in favour of this freeze. We are not alone in wanting to set a freeze this year. For example, Hartlepool Council has already done so. Indeed, Keir Starmer, no less, has called for council tax to be frozen. And just this very morning, Aliza Dodds, Labour Shadow's Chancellor, publicly criticised councils for increasing council tax by 4 to 5%. The Mayor has often said, many times, that her group are compassionate councillors. Well, let them Labour show that they are by supporting the people's budget and freeze council tax. And what I've heard tonight from various Labour councillors in the room, or their rooms, I think it goes really, really bad that they're actually trying to scaremonger people who listen, anybody who listens to them, to say that this would put the council into bankruptcy and to a really big debt in the future. That is scaremongering and very far from the truth. I will be supporting this Conservative People's Budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McIntyre. Can I bring in Councillor Samuel, please? Can you turn on, anybody wishing to speak, can you please turn on your cameras? Thank you.
Can you see me? I can't seem to get the camera. It's on there. Okay, fine. Thank you, Chair. I had intended to oppose the Conservative budget proposal, but in truth, I didn't hear a budget proposal tonight. What I heard was a budget proposal would have had the ideas to address the issues facing the borough. What I basically heard was a social media script. It starts with some populist ideas designed to get some attention in tweets, then it kind of fizzles out. So let's look at the central proposal, the idea to freeze the council tax. This sits upon the notion that there's an inexhaustible magic money tree of reserves. I've devoted much of my time in this council in previous meetings pointing out the untruth of this statement, and others have talked about this. I'd only add at this point in time that Councillor Brockbank seemed to have scaled down from calling it 68 million to 14 million. I would ask him in his right of reply to confirm that he now withdraws the allegation that there is £68 million in usable reserves. Council tax proposed is a 2% rise, just short of 2%, 1.99. This is what the government expects us to do, and Conservative authorities up and down the country are implementing this sum as well. Because if you don't, your base budget is reduced, not just this year, but forever. It's not as if the social media script says for 1 year only, and Councillor Blackburn has said. It's like a Christmas puppy, basically. It's for life. It puts at risk services from social care to branch libraries or road safety patrols outside schools forever. Because moving on, from every time you raise the council tax, the amount that you can raise in future, the amount your base budget is significantly reduced and is reduced ongoing basis, never to be recovered. The remainder, 3%, is the adult social care precept. Now, underfunding of adult social care is the biggest crisis, next to COVID, probably facing this country, and has been for some time. Every serious politician knows that. Administration after administration have admitted it and have said they would come forward with plans to deal with adult social care. However, we still await the government's proposals on this, promised when Boris Johnson became Prime Minister, which he said he had something ready to go. We're still waiting to hear it. It's been a very long wait now. And your government is telling us it's providing, in the meantime, extra money to fund adult social care. The 3% precept is that extra money, and effectively, therefore, the Conservatives are saying we shouldn't take the extra money that's available. That's what it boils down to. I completely agree that it should not fall on the back of council taxpayers, as does Keir Starmer, as does Annalise Dodds. But it is your government that is saying it should fall on the back of council taxpayers. What the Labour Party is saying that central government funding should meet the shortfall and not the council taxpayers of the borough. However, you say we should not take it, and therefore the only thing if we're not taking the money we're being allowed to fund adult social care is to cut back on people and support for care homes, cut back for adults with learning disabilities. I certainly challenge any Tory councillor that's here to tell us here and now that we've got enough adult social care money and it doesn't need any more. It's just not the fact, and you're breaking a political consensus which is even admitted by your own government. You've been told by the Section 151 officer that this social media script could not be implemented. You propose it in the full knowledge that it won't happen. You expect to get a few votes out of this dishonest social media script. You seem to imagine that slick graphics on Twitter and boosted social media posts are a subject for a vision for the borough. I repeat, I cannot understand. I am completely astounded as to why anybody would seriously come forward with a proposal that you've been told by the professional officers that would undermine the financial stability of the authority and could in time lead to bankruptcy, which has happened to many councils, Conservative councils in the south of the country already. That's not the future that we want. Even Donald Trump, who was a master of populism, would think this was a step too far. Support the Labour budget and kick this amendment out. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Samuel. Can I now bring in Councillor Bartoli, please?
Thank you, Chair. I think Councillor Brockbank was trying to raise a point of order, if that's possible.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. Yeah, I think Councillor Samuels and the full verve and caught up in the moment of his rhetoric is factually inaccurate. We haven't the comments about the 3% adult social care precept are entirely inaccurate. I wish him to withdraw them. We have made absolutely clear in our budget that the funding commitments of the council have been fully addressed and will be maintained. So he's inaccurate in that, and I'm sure you might want to put it on his leaflets, but I would wish him to withdraw that remark.
So you're telling me you now want to put the council tax up by 3%, which is the precept?
No, Councillor, I'm saying it being misleading in what you've said in your speech. We have not. We've said everything that has been suggested in your budget, including the provision of the adult social care precept, could be met through our budget. You seem to imply that wasn't the case, so I wish you to withdraw that remark.
I will not withdraw the remark because you are proposing not to set the 3% precept. That's a matter of fact, unless you're withdrawing it now.
No, I think you're entirely wrong, and I think the chair needs to make a ruling on this. You're being misleading.
Well, you are as well, but I wasn't going to say it.
Councillor, I'm not having an argument between two councillors over this. Mr. Roberts, could you come in for clarification on this, please?
Yes, Chair. In essence, it would be the suggestion from the Conservatives that the 3% precept that is being suggested for adult social care will be met from reserves, is the position I understand. Perhaps Councillor Brockbank would like to confirm that that's my understanding. Or my understanding is correct.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is indeed.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I think that clarifies the position.
Thank you, Mr. Roberts. Thank you. Can I now bring in Councillor Bartoli?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your patience. It gives me great pleasure to present and support the Conservative People's Budget. The principle of this budget is a simple one: cutting the cost of politics and to put the people of North Tyneside first. The key policy is the freezing of council tax for 1 year to ease the financial pressures on the people of the borough. This 1 year proposal recognises the pressure on everyone caused by this pandemic and gives people a break from the ever increasing cost of council tax. We're going to achieve this in 3 ways. Firstly, a series of measures designed to cut the cost of politics, which include cutting our councillor expenses by 20%, something that none of the members opposite have bothered to mention today in their objections. That's in line with those on furlough payments and getting rid of frivolous expenses like the Mayor's chauffeur-driven car. Councillor Lott may think that the Mayor's too good to get the bus, but I'm afraid the rest of us aren't. Secondly, by using the government's council tax relief grant of over £2 million. And finally, by spending just over £3 million of the £67 million of council reserves. The main point to stress is this budget maintains all of Labour's key spending promises with no cuts to services. It cuts the costs of politics, freezes council's tax, and still provides a balanced and affordable budget. Now, from what we've heard tonight, our Labour councillors are trying again to use Project Fear and call us irresponsible and risking the financial future of the council. So let's take a little bit of a look at the truth about these reserves. 10 years ago, this council had £26 million in reserves. We are now sitting on £67 million of our residents' money. In the last 10 years, the most the reserves have ever dropped is just over £2 million. Our budget will use less than 5% of the current reserves. Councillor Johnson called it a raid on the reserves at 5%. Anyone who seriously thinks that this proposal will risk the financial future of this council is simply trying to use fear as cover. Now, the public have listened to the arguments tonight about the affordability of this budget and will make up their own mind on its financial merits. However, there will not be one member of the public who thinks the Labour budget is morally right. If the people of this borough could vote tonight, they would overwhelmingly vote for our budget. Now, Councillor Newman calls it petty party politics and a cheap political stunt. Councillor Samuels calls it populist. I say it is listening to the needs and listening to the wants and listening to the hopes of our residents. If the Mayor and Cabinet had proposed this budget, the Labour councillors would be shouting it from the rooftops and praising their bravery and vision for its people-first approach. But because it is proposed by a different political party, it has been treated with contempt. Every vote for our budget this evening is a vote to put people over party and principle over ideology. And I hope we can persuade some of our Labour colleagues to join us in supporting this people's budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Bortoli. Can I just point out...
Can I just make one point of order, please? I made no reference whatsoever to the Mayor's use of the Civic car. In fact, I know for a fact that Norma Redfern very rarely travels in that Civic car. She uses her own vehicle. I referred to it as the Civic car, and I also cited one particular example, which I know to be factual from my own time as chair of this council. I was invited to attend the ACF squadron out in Wide Open. That was all I stated, that it is required, not least because I wouldn't want any mayor, even someone my size, to be seen on public transport with over 20,000 quid's worth of gold hanging around their neck. That might prove too tempting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lott. Can I now bring in Councillor Matt Wilson, please?
Thank you, Chair. None of us take any pleasure in raising taxes. This is a difficult decision that we face tonight. I quote the report of the Conservative Group, page 1, section 1, so-called People's Budget, which reads as follows. The Conservative Group contends that a freeze in council tax can be achieved as a one-off measure to ease the financial burden on residents by drawing on reserves, which are unring-fenced and available to spend. And then I note that from page 2 onwards, the Conservative Group report offers a range of budget headlines, including levies, contingencies, etc. It's strange to me that amongst all that, it contains no figures for the reserves referred to, as the whole thrust of their financial logic, as we've heard tonight, is that the council is holding back reserves, which they refer to as rainy day funds. It's doubly strange that their report lacks these figures for the value of the council's reserves, as a resident wrote to me just last week for clarification on the amount of the money that the council holds in reserves, quoting to me publicity released by Councillor Brockbank that states the figure of the council's reserves to be £67 million, a figure we've heard a lot about tonight. Indeed, just this week, in preparation for this meeting, Councillor Brockbank sent a letter to myself and all the elected members, also quoting the figure of £67 million held in reserves. So to summarise, Councillor Brockbank and the Conservative group are using the figure of 67 million in their communications with the public, whilst simultaneously in this report stating that the council's reserves are unring-fenced and available to spend. I'm therefore led to believe that Councillor Brockbank wants the public to think that the council has 67 million in reserves that are free and unring-fenced. He wants the public to think this because it suits his political cause. To use the figure of 67 million in relation to this budget is misleading, and I think he knows it, as he's been present on numbers of occasions when we've been informed that the council's free reserves are only around 20% of that figure, as has been verified this evening by Councillor Glindon, and I think I also heard acknowledged by Councillor McIntyre. So will Councillor Brockbank tonight acknowledge that he does know that the council does not have £67 million in its free reserves, and commit to no longer quoting that figure in his communications, as he knows that figure to include ring-fence funds and is therefore misleading. This really matters because budgets are about financial risk management. Maintaining our reserves is not just saving for a rainy day, it's about maintaining a position of liquidity during a time of high economic volatility and uncertainty. And as the report of the Section 151 officer and the external opinion received shows, to allow our reserves to further diminish would be irresponsible. And so, Chair, this Conservative proposal sadly is not a people's budget by any stretch of the imagination, because it plays fast and loose with the security of our residents and the sustainability of the services on which they depend.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Can I now bring in Councillor Austin, please?
Sorry, Chair, I didn't quite hear that. It was me that you were calling to speak, was it?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
The budget proposed by the Conservative group is an attempt to ameliorate some of the effects of an unprecedented set of events which have changed our way of life over the last year. Many of our residents will have been receiving just 80% of their usual pay for almost a year now, or have lost their jobs completely, and they will be struggling to meet their bills without those bills rising even further. As Councillor Wallace rightly said, council tax is a huge burden on any household budget. The Conservative proposal uses just over £3 million worth of the unring-fenced reserves to give residents a break from the annual increase in their council tax, while the country, individuals and families attempt to rebuild after a terrible year. This use of a little of its reserves still leaves North Tyneside Council with more than the minimum level the Finance Officer officially deems acceptable. Or is that a piece of officer advice that Labour don't want to talk about? The other savings we have identified will make perfect sense to residents as well. Do we really still need the same level of trade union facility time, given that so many staff are working from home? In fact, we would argue that we have never really needed that level of time being spent by council officers on carrying out work for the trade unions. Can we really continue to justify the chauffeur-driven car for the chair of the council and, on occasions, the mayor? We believe the residents see this as an unnecessary luxury and would expect the council to be more prudent with their council tax. With regard to Councillor Johnson's comments regarding affluent areas and giving to the rich, there will be many elderly people who may live in a nice area, who are asset rich and cash poor and struggling with increasing bills, unless, of course, Councillor Johnson knows everybody's actual circumstances. Surely this is the year to freeze the council tax and take some of the pressure off our residents' pockets. Use just a small amount of the reserves and some more prudent use of taxpayers' money to give our residents a welcome break from ever-increasing bills. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Austin. Can I now bring in Councillor Rankin?
I will be voting against this amendment, and I will be doing so for the following fundamental reasons. The first reason is that it is based on a fundamental misrepresentation of the council's financial strength and standing. I've seen social media statements, and in recent days, what I would class as unsolicited junk mail sent to my council email address, which stated clearly that North Tyneside Council has £67 million worth of reserves and so can afford to have an unfunded council tax freeze this year. Stating this £67 million figure in the context of the financial strength of the council and its ability to meet and absorb an unfunded council tax freeze, and that's the key point here, from reserves is simply not true. It is so easily disproven by the independent council officers and the official papers that it really does worry me as to why it continues to be said rather than corrected. Residents have the right to have the financial strength of this local authority reported to them accurately. You simply cannot spin official audited figures. And so it's extremely disappointing that this £67 million figure continues to be used when in reality, and what's been made clear again tonight, the actual figure is only 14.4 million. We as councillors vote to accept the independent auditor's report each year, which states very clearly what the accurate levels of the reserves are and how those reserves are legally able to be applied. You cannot simply use higher figures for political expediency as and when you choose. My suggestion to council officers is that if opposition councillors continue to misstate the levels of the reserves within the correct context of an unfunded council tax cut, that we ask the independent auditors for a statement to be issued publicly and posted on the council website so that residents are able to have access to the accurate position. The second reason I will be voting against this amendment is because I believe the use of the council tax support grant to balance this budget, whilst not illegal, is fundamentally immoral. The government's own guidance notes from December 2020, which is the COVID-19 Funding for Local Government 2021 guidance, makes clear in paragraph 26 that the funding is there to meet the additional costs associated with increases in local council tax support caseloads in the next financial year, i.e. the most badly affected people, the most financially disadvantaged. The guidance notes go on to say that whilst this funding is not ring-fenced, it is supposed to be used to provide support to vulnerable households, including through local welfare schemes. Nowhere in that guidance does it suggest that the funding is intended to be used to plug a £2 million gap caused by a general council tax freeze this year. When council tax was previously frozen, it was due to specific council tax freeze grants. That has not been provided by the government in this financial year. This means I'm being asked to therefore vote to withdraw support from some of the poorest and most vulnerable people in North Tyneside. The budget amendment, as it's suggested, is an attack on those people that we and clearly even central government are seeking to protect with this targeted grant funding. I've consistently spoken about the necessity for prudence at such a worrying and uncertain time, and I've also spoken about the fact that decisions on budgets do not just affect one year, but have unforeseen circumstances into the future. An unfunded freeze on council tax this year using the two methods stated of the reserves and also using the one-off grant that should be applied to the local council tax support scheme will create a £15 million black hole in the council's finances in the next 5 years. If the council tax support scheme is reinstigated next year, that black hole increases to 25 million. The alternative for balancing of next year's budget would require the loss of around 200 jobs and the decimation of local services.
We have 1 minute left, Councillor Rankin.
We'd have to, okay, thank you. We'd have to find another £5 million of cuts next year. It would also take our levels of reserves down to the bare minimum that we legally have to carry in line with our reserves and balance policy. The Section 151 officer, who is independent of politics, has issued an almost unprecedented warning to councillors tonight about the financial risks posed by the Conservative budget. I say unprecedented because it happened in 2018 when the opposition tried to pass a similar irresponsible budget, which, had it gone through, would have lost the council another £8 million just to date. This is an election ploy, but a very dangerous one. It attacks the thousands of poorest in our society on the false premise that North Tyneside Council has substantial financial strength to absorb such recklessness. This proposal would risk our financial standing by reducing our reserves to the barest minimum, around 11 million, and leave us with no financial buffer for any unforeseen further financial uncertainty. Our independent Section 151 officer is clear about that. I will be voting against this motion. Councillor Brockbank talks of setting policy. I wouldn't look to set a policy that risks the financial stability of North Tyneside Council and punishes the poorest in our borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Rankin. Can I now bring in Councillor Thirlway?
Thank you, Chair. This budget is either about generating headlines for Facebook, Twitter, and leaflets, or more worryingly, this is a serious proposition, and it is evidence that the current Conservative group can't be trusted to ever run the council. I believe not a single councillor here tonight, regardless of their party political affiliation, want to increase taxes. But politics isn't about making easy decisions. And I feel sorry for those members in the Conservative group tonight and in the Conservative Party in North Tyneside who don't support the actions of Councillor Brockbank and the new Conservative leadership in the way that they've approached tonight's meeting and the previous meeting last month. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thirlway. Can I bring in Mayor Redfern?
Thank you, Chairman. I would just like to take the opportunity to make something clear to Councillor Bartoli, that it is not the Mayor's car, and I certainly very, very rarely use it. Ask many residents in this borough that I drive around in a white Fiesta, and I will continue to do so. And the times I've used the car are on a very rare occasion, and I've had to use because my car was not available. When Councillor Brockbank talks about listening to residents, I believe he lives at the coast, is that right? Well, at the end of the day, I wonder how he thought we made all that difference to the coastline. We did it because we, as a Labour council, are listening councillors. We listened to the residents and worked with them to change that council coastline into one of the best coastlines in the country. And when he says that I'm not listening to the residents, I would ask him to look at the post in my office and listen to what the responses I get from some of the residents in the borough. They're certainly not negative, and many of them are very, very positive, to be quite honest. And I spend my time going out and meeting with groups and meeting with residents of this borough and listening to their concerns. In fact, I have an open door policy. And I would like to actually say I couldn't support this, could never support this this budget. Why? Because this pandemic is not over. It is not over and will not be over for some time yet. I don't know how many more businesses are going to fall by the wayside, how many more jobs are going to be lost, how many more elderly people will have to take into care and look after, how many young children will be taken into care and will have to look after in these difficult times. And if you knew the cost of just taking one child into care, you'd be amazed. No wonder we need the 14.5 million in reserves, to be quite honest. And I just find it amazing that they talk about this listening government when I look back over the years that I've been around. Why on earth didn't they do all these things when they were in power? Let's be honest, this has nothing to do with what's right for our residents. And our residents know exactly that this Labour Council is on their side. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mayor Redfern. And finally, can I bring in Councillor Pickard before I bring in Councillor Clinton with his right to reply? So, Councillor Pickard.
Thank you, Chair. The North Tyneside Conservatives continue to do the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. This action has been described as insanity, but in this case, the consequences of the Conservatives' objection will lead to instability and put at risk the finances of the council. They hope it will lead to a misrepresentation of the penalties the council face from the years of austerity we've had to fight hard to keep our services. They conveniently forget that it is the assumption of their government that councils will raise council tax by 2%, adult social care by precept by 3%. The government have built this into our funding in such a way that at the start of the year they justify as a cut or make announcements of large investments in services without telling the public that they will be paying for it through increased council taxes. And the sting in the tail is that they will assume we have done this, and for future years they will make reductions in our grant, a double whammy. As an example, the adult social care precept, the Conservatives announced an extra 1 billion, but that was funded by 700 million from the 3% ESC precept, and even the 0.3 billion supposed to be provided by the government is part taken from a new cut to the new homes bonus to councils. Therefore, very little of this extra money is from the government, it's out the pockets of our residents. They say it's a one-off. If that's so, then we'll have to accept that they'll deplete the reserves and that they will have to replace those by next year. But what they're actually doing is you're building in a 5 million annual additional burden on our residents from 2022 onwards. In fact, over the lifespan of the medium-term financial plan, it will add 20 million to the already identified gap of 22 million. And that is not, as described before, as scaremongering and trying to frighten people. That's contained in Table 8 and Table 5 of the report that all members have had seen for the last few weeks. So there's no denying that the figures are there. I've not seen in any of their leaflets or pronouncements that the consequence of their proposed council tax freeze for this year is that residents will have to make it up in future years through increases in council tax above the government's projection or £20 million worth of cuts over the medium-term financial plan. If you ask everybody if they want anything for nothing, they'll say yes. But if you say, but you've got to pay for it next year, you may get a different answer when you go out to consultation. Chair, in addition to this, we've all received a letter from Councillor Sean Brockbank, the Conservative Group leader. In the letter, he describes this as the people's budget, and let's take politics out of and do what is best for the people of North Tyneside. I've learned over the years that you're in trouble when you hear Conservatives saying they're on the side of the people and they want to take politics out of the situation. I was once told, to know what people really think, observe what they do, not what they say. It's in the Tory DNA to attack ordinary working people's rights. This is no exception, because what they do not mention in their letter is what is in their objection, that is an attack on our council workers. Once again, they seek to reduce representation by cutting facility time. Even their own government gives facility time to their union representatives. In fact, the highest number, with over 1,000 full-time equivalent, costing over 2.3 million a year, is in Her Majesty's Revenue and Customs, directly controlled by the government. North Tyneside has benefited from good industrial relations. Our relationship with our employees' representatives has always been constructive. We might not agree all the time, but they have a strong sense of public service and delivering quality service to our residents. Councillor Austin asks, well, why do we need facility time when people are working at home? We could have not managed the large-scale change over the last decade without the union's help. But more importantly, in this present pandemic crisis, we have seen who are the essential workers. It's not the CEOs or billionaires, but it's our nurses, doctors, our health and care workers, shop workers and council workers.
1 minute.
Our council workers that you are now trying to deny the very facilities time result in agreements and flexible and redeployment to help our residents who have praised the staff. Contrast our staff's contribution to society compared with the government giving out contracts worth millions, in fact billions, to their supporters. It did not take you long to move from clapping our essential workers to attacking them. Chair, I'd ask the council to reject this objection.
Thank you, Councillor Pickard. Now, can I now bring in Councillor Glindon with his right to reply?
Chair, it's not my right to reply. I'd just like to put this statement to the council. We've heard about the opposition's budget objection and about what it contains. However, by law, we also have to have regard to the professional opinion of the council's 151 officer. That opinion is that the objection was accepted. If the objection was accepted, it would bring into question the financial sustainability of the council. We cannot allow that to happen. I can't see any merit in discussing the objection any further I therefore move that the question on whether the objection should be accepted be now put.
Can I second that, Chair?
Is that right? You want to put the question, Councillor Glendon?
That's correct, yes.
Right, do you have a seconder?
Yes, I'll second it, Chair.
And that's the chair. Okay. I believe that they've been debated sufficiently to be able to go to this. So I will now take a named vote on the procedural motion that the question be now put. Mr. Roberts, can you please conduct a named vote on the procedural motion?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, I will go through councillors by Christian name, insofar as I'm aware that they are in attendance. So we'll begin with Councillor Alan Percy. Are you for or against the question now being put?
Against the.
No, sorry, councillor. This is. Shall we put the objection to the vote now? We then will go on to a separate vote about the objection itself.
Yeah. Yes.
Oh. Oh.
That's my understanding. Councillor Alison Austin, are you for or against the question being put?
For.
Councillor Andy Newman.
For.
Anthony McMullen. I have a popped up message that everyone can see which says for. Councillor Bruce Pickard.
For.
Councillor Carl Johnson.
For.
Councillor Kath Davis.
For.
Councillor Davy Drummond.
For.
Councillor Debbie Cox. Councillor Eddie Dark.
For.
Councillor Erin Parker Leonard.
For.
Councillor Frank Lott.
For.
Councillor Gary Bell.
For.
Councillor Gary Madden.
For.
Councillor Janet Hunter.
For.
Councillor Janice Mole.
For.
Councillor Jim Allen.
For.
Councillor Joan Walker.
For.
Councillor Joanne Cassidy.
For.
Joe Kerwin.
For.
Councillor John Hunter.
For.
John O'Shea.
For.
Councillor John Sterling.
For.
Councillor Judith Wallace.
For.
Councillor Julie Cruddas.
For.
Karen Clark.
For.
Karen Lee. I don't seem to have a response from Councillor Lee. I shall move on and check again at the end, if I may. Councillor Ken Barry.
For.
Councillor Lewis Bartoli.
For.
Linda Bell.
For.
Councillor Linda Dark.
For.
Councillor Margaret Hall.
For.
Councillor Martin Rankin.
For.
Councillor Matt Wilson.
And I think we might hit the required number.
I have no doubt we are over 50%. Would members prefer that I continue, or are members happy to accept that we have 33 in favour so far, which is more than the half required?
Agreed.
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 Thank you, Chair.
Now, I will now take a named vote on the Conservative group's objection. The vote will be on the basis of a simple majority. So, Mr. Roberts, can you please conduct the named vote on the objection?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So, Councillor Alan Percy, are you for or against the objection being approved?
I didn't quite hear what you said.
Sorry, Councillor. Are you for or against the objection being approved?
I'm against it being approved.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Alison Austin.
For.
Councillor Andy Newman.
Against.
Anthony McMullen.
Against.
Councillor Bruce Pickard.
Against.
Councillor Carl Johnson.
Against.
Councillor Kath Davis.
Against.
Councillor Davy Drummond.
Against.
Cox. Councillor Eddie Dark.
Against.
Councillor Erin Parker Leonard.
Against.
Councillor Frank Lott.
Against.
Gary Bell.
Against.
Gary Madden.
Against.
Janet Hunter.
Against.
Councillor Janice Mole.
Against.
Allen.
Against.
Councillor Joan Walker.
Against.
Councillor Joanne Cassidy.
Against.
Councillor Joe Kerwin.
Against.
Councillor John Hunter.
Against.
Councillor John O'Shea.
Against.
Councillor John Sterling.
Against.
Councillor Judith Wallace.
For.
Councillor Judy Cruddas.
Against.
Councillor Karen Lee.
Against.
Councillor Karen Clark.
Against.
Councillor Ken Barry.
For.
Lewis Bartoli.
For.
Councillor Linda Bell.
Against.
Councillor Linda Dark.
Against.
Margaret Hall.
Against.
Councillor Martin Rankin.
Against.
Councillor Matt Wilson.
Against.
Matthew Thurloway.
Against.
Maureen Madden.
Against.
Muriel Green.
Against.
Councillor Naomi Craven.
Against.
Nigel Huscroft.
Against.
And Norma Redfern.
Against.
Pam McIntyre.
For.
Pat Oliver.
Against.
Councillor Paul Richardson.
Against.
Councillor Peter Earley.
Against.
Councillor Ray Glendon.
Against.
Councillor Sandra Graham.
Against.
Councillor Sarah Day.
Against.
Councillor Sean Brockbank.
Very much for.
Councillor Steve Cox.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Phillips.
Against.
Councillor Tommy Mulvenner.
Against.
Councillor Trish Brady.
Against.
Wendy Lott.
Against.
And Councillor Willie Samuel.
Against.
Is there any councillor present that I have not called out, please? I can therefore
Hi there,
say...
can you hear me? It's
Yes, I can indeed, Councillor Lee.
sorry about that. I'm obviously... Sorry, I'm moving in and out. I'll text Willie.
Got your vote, Karen. Councillor Lee, we acknowledge.
We have Councillor Lee's vote, yes.
Yeah.
The result, therefore, Chair, is that we have 6 in favour of the motion, the objection being accepted, and 48 against. The objection is therefore not carried.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Roberts. So the objection is defeated. So I will now invite members to speak on the substantive motion, i.e. the Cabinet's proposals, and each speaker has up to 5 minutes. Councillor Day. Councillor Day. Councillor Day, you're on mute if you're speaking. She's gone. Would anybody like to speak on the substantive motion? Councillor Brockbank. Councillor Brockbank.
Yeah, I'm here, Chair. Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity to speak on this motion. The political choices made in the elected mayor's budget are not designed to put people first across North Tyneside. Every year since taking office, the elected mayor has told us that times are tough, that we must raise council tax because of government cuts, and the party opposite have voted through council tax rise upon council tax rise. But what they've tried to hide is the fact that since the elected mayor took office, the amount in reserves has more than doubled. So we now sit here in 2021, almost a year into a global pandemic, which has put unimaginable pressure on people's finances. And with £67 million in reserves and unprecedented levels of government money flowing into the council, the mayor's still pleading poverty and won't use the people's money for the people's needs. If Labour have been...
Chair, can I call a point of order there, Chair? That £67 million has been mentioned again in relation to council tax cuts. And I'm calling this a point of order, if you don't mind, Chair. It's just been stated again, it's 67 million, when it's been categorically stated tonight, it's 14.7 currently.
If Councillor Rankin reined in his ire and listened to what I said, what I actually said was reserves. I didn't talk about council anything in terms of council tax or anything like that. My exact words were £67 million in reserves.
You're referring to it in the context of the council tax rises, Councillor Brockbank. I've already made that clear.
Well, you might make it clear, but I disagree. In that entire paragraph, I have said nothing about council tax rise. What I've said is, and with £67 million in reserves.
You've just started off by talking about council tax rises. You've said that council tax has gone up year after year after year, and that there's £67 million worth of reserves.
Right.
That's misleading.
Sorry, Chair. I'm not going to get a proper response. Sorry, Chair.
There is not, Councillor Brockbank, can we just reaffirm, there is not 67 million in reserves that's readily available for use. There are a lot of ring-fenced monies in those reserves which are not accessible for use. There is 14.4 million, which you've been told on numerous occasions this evening, that are the reserves that are of use. Not 67 million. You are misleading the public by telling them there is 67 million pounds in reserves that are of use to the public, or of use to the council.
No, I haven't said that. I said in reserves.
On numerous occasions that the council has 67 million in reserves that can be used.
No, I have not said that. Chair, sorry, I've put a point of order in your interpretation. That is unacceptable. I've not said that.
Why are you
You just
mentioning
did.
67 million when you know that that's not what the...
Which you said could be used. I've never said that. My exact wording is 67 million
pounds.
Chair, sorry, I don't want this to descend to a Hanforth Parish Council debacle, but my exact wording was 67 million pounds in reserves. I didn't talk about unring fenced or council tax. That was my exact wording. I have it in front of me. I can send you it.
But
it's a deliberate inference.
67 million pound may be in reserve but not accessible. So why mention 67 million when you know there are not accessible?
Chair, I have a right to speak to this motion, which I don't think is in the best interest of the residents. There are 67 million pounds in reserves in the papers that are clearly there, that the council has in reserves. The point being that my point being that reserves have built up over years.
For a reason.
For a reason, but it is people's money. Chair, I feel like I'm having a debate with the chair. If you want to make a ruling, then that's fine, but I don't think it's appropriate for the chair to engage in debate.
I'm not engaging in debate. I'm making you correct what you've just said. There is not 67 million pound in reserves that are accessible to the public.
Chair, You
are misleading the public by saying there are 67 million pounds in reserves, which assumptions will be made that they are readily available to the public, and they're not. Can you continue, Councillor Brockbank?
Yes, I was trying to. Thank you. If Labour have been putting millions in reserves away for a rainy day, let me tell them very clearly that for many people across the borough, the rain is pouring in. If now is not the time to use reserves to relieve the financial pressure on our people, then when is? The government is borrowing at unprecedented levels to protect jobs, lives and livelihoods. Now is absolutely the right time for this council to take drastic measures to help the people of North Tyneside in this crisis. I take note that nowhere in the Labour budget does it consider reducing councillors' allowances, and those with the loudest voices on the other side have also avoided talking about that too, slightly close to home. They've chosen to hike council tax rather than axe the chauffeur-driven civic car. They've chosen to hike council tax rather than abolish the council magazine. My final point, the Labour Party has made choices in this budget, and I say that word, choices, but let's not pretend it's a budget for the people. It's a timid budget which ignores the needs and wishes of the people. There's a budget to maintain the status quo in times of emergency. There's a Labour budget of which members opposite should be thoroughly ashamed.
Councillor Bartoli.
Thank you, Chair. The budget presented by the Mayor and Cabinet today is nothing more than an insult to the hard-working, long-suffering residents of this borough. If ours is a people's budget, theirs is the other people's budget. In a time when we as representatives are asking other people to take cuts in their pay and be on furlough, their budget maintains all of their allowances at 100%. While other people cycle to save carbon emissions or use public transport to get to work, the Labour Party intend to keep the Mayor in her chauffeur-driven car. While other people, like the residents of Hartlepool, have had their council tax frozen by the Conservative-led council against officer advice, their budget raises it by the maximum amount yet again. At this time, when we are asking other people to close the shutters and learn new ways of working, they are simply proposing another unimaginative, fear-ridden budget. And most importantly, while sitting on huge reserves, millions of pounds of other people's money, they are refusing to spend a single penny on reducing people's council tax burden. Again, to put these reserves into context, 10 years ago, this council held around £26 million in reserves. 10 years later, while under Labour, still repeating the mantra of Tory cuts and austerity every year, this council now sits on almost £70 million of other people's money. Well, those other people that you're ignoring are the families, workers and residents who sent us here to represent them. And I can guarantee if the people of Monk Seaton, Cullercoats, Churton, Tynemouth or any of our wards were here with us today, they would tell us this budget does not respect them or represent them. And now is the time for politicians to start putting other people first. For these reasons, I cannot support this budget. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Chair, could I ask Councillor Bartoli to take back what he said? It's not the mayor's car.
Yeah. Councillor Bartoli, can I reiterate that it is the civic car and not the mayor's car?
Apologies, I take that back. Would you like me to repeat the sentence using the civic car rather than the
It's
mayor's?
the civic car, just to be made it is not the mayor's car, it is the civic car, which is used by the chair, deputy chair, the mayor and other civic representatives of this borough when going to civic functions or other meetings that require transport where places may be inaccessible.
I apologise, Chair. I meant to. I accept that it is the civic car that the mayor occasionally uses.
And the chair and the deputy chair and other civic dignitaries. So it is not just the mayor that uses the car. Thank you. Councillor Pickford.
I think the point is it's still a huge waste of money, regardless of who's actually sat in it. Yeah.
That's in your opinion, Councillor Bartoli.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pickard. Oh, sorry, it was Councillor Johnson. Sorry, Councillor Pickard. I had brought Councillor Johnson in and then the mayor wanted to raise a point of order. So apologies. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. I absolutely will be supporting this budget. I'm supporting this borough budget for the poorest 10,000 households in this borough, who we've just seen under the vote down Tory proposals would have had to pay an extra £150 a year in council tax. Our proposal will mean those 10,000 poorest households will not have to pay that council tax burden in a worst possible time for those households. But also supporting this budget to allow us to continue record of delivering for North Tyneside. This will continue to allow us to build the 3,000 affordable homes that we so badly need right across the borough. This will continue to allow us to deliver on the regeneration of North Shields and continue the regeneration of Wallsend, where we've seen significant improvements recently with the sale of the Swans Yard, which is a massive moment in the regeneration of North Tyneside Wallsend Town Centre. And we've just seen that they lodged the application for the new medical facility in the centre of Wallsend, and North Shields badly need regenerating, and this budget allows us to invest in regenerating those areas further. And also, we all know our libraries and leisure centres are absolutely key, and we all know they were at risk the last time the Tories controlled this council. This budget allows us again to continue to protect them and keep them open. It also allows us to continue delivering outstanding children's services. Councillor Peter Early has done a fantastic job in children's services and getting those to outstanding. Those staff were absolute heroes in terms of at the very start of this pandemic, when it was the greatest uncertainty, we were just getting off, just before that we got offsetted by the service and we got rated outstanding. They've worked all the way through and they've been fantastic, and it's great to see we can protect those services going forward. Backing our carers. Somebody used the phrase clap for our carers. Absolutely, we did clap for our carers, but in this side of the chamber, what we're doing is we're clapping for our carers. We know they've already got national recognition, but we're putting out a pilot in the northwest of the borough that will not only clap for our carers, we'll make their terms and conditions better, we'll make their further educational and career progression better. We are bringing them back in-house to give them the backing that they absolutely deserve. We invested in roads and pavements right around the borough, and this will allow us to continue doing so. It'll also allow us to invest in transport and work parts of the regional transport team to bring in more and more investment in North Tyneside as we look forward to bringing a metro extension to Cobalt, which will be in the North East Transport Plan. Carbon emissions. We declared a climate emergency last year, and we are absolutely already working towards 47% cut in carbon emissions. We've seen more money coming into this budget this year, just in the last couple of weeks. And this budget allows us to continue investing in LED lights and make greater carbon savings in the next year. This is a budget for the people of North Tyneside that will deliver for North Tyneside and continue delivering. I want to pay tribute to every single council member of staff in this borough who has worked tirelessly on this budget, and all those staff that have worked tirelessly through the pandemic. Each and every one of them are absolute heroes, and this budget does our utmost to protect those and ensure they are protected going forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Johnson. Can I now bring in Councillor Bruce Pickard?
Thank you, Chair. Despite the decade of attacks on local government finance, once again we have protected our services that are so vital to the residents of the borough. We have managed to continue to invest in our communities through our ambitions plans, ensuring we invest in every sector of the borough, including plans for our North Shoes regeneration, a new library in Tynemouth, investment in Segadunum and Swans, investment around Killingworth Lake and the Wagonways project, and continue our investment in Whitley Bay. But of all the projects, I'm very proud that we are continuing funding for our Poverty Intervention Fund. This has so far led to 4 initiatives: poverty proofing in schools to help our children and young people, support for school uniforms clothing costs to help our poorest families who struggle to afford the essentials, support for food during school holidays to help our poorest families who rely on free school meals during term time to be able to adequately feed themselves, and also a benefits take-up campaign and support to help our oldest people to get what they are entitled to and not to fall victim to dreadful scams by people who prey on the vulnerable. So far, this fund has made a massive difference and provided a lifeline for many people. During half-term last October, the fund enabled 1,000 meals to be provided through 5 different projects to help families in their communities, as well as additional support through the food bank. And a further £60 voucher per child entitled to free school meals was provided. These vouchers were able to be used in a range of local supermarkets. From Christmas, the fund was expanded to include food for older people, and this has meant over 2,000 meals have been supplied, an absolute lifeline, particularly during lockdown. £45 per child is available for families who are entitled to free school meals as vouchers to get school uniform, clothing and shoes. The vouchers can be used in a range of different places to reduce stigma and increase choice. Working with the community clothing scheme, we are also able to support other families who need help with school clothing but who are not entitled to free school meals. Benefits take-up campaign and support work for older people started last October through the CAB and Age UK. Initial reports from CAB alone is that this has benefited 94 residents in their first month of funding and brought in 75,600 extra income, with another 50,700 expected from these initial clients. By continuing with this fund, we can ensure that we continue to provide essential support to our poorest people and families. We could have done all this despite the cuts, hidden at the imposition of expected rises in council tax and adult social care precepts, putting the emphasis of affordability of paying for these services to the backs of our residents. This is a true budget for the people of North Tyneside, a budget to protect the services while at the same time to protect our most vulnerable residents. Chair, I would ask the council to agree this budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pickard. Can I bring in Councillor Thirlaway, please?
Thank you, Chair. I represent Wallsend Ward. The town centre and the Wallsend area was decimated by the inaction of Linda Arkley when she was mayor. Thanks to elected Mayor Norma Redfern, we've seen unprecedented investment and regeneration, and as Councillor Johnson said, we've seen good jobs, good social housing, and a supermarket that Linda Arkley promised over a decade ago. The Conservative group are determined to shore up their vote and their few seats at the coast. The elected mayor works for all of North Tyneside, and this is a true people's budget which will deliver for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thirlaway. Do I have anybody else that wishes to speak to the substantive motion? Grazie. Councillor Early.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to say that this budget is not just a budget for this year. It's a budget that enables us to go forward in future years and support the services that our residents desperately need. Our vulnerable children, our vulnerable adults. The cost of those services are increasing year on year, and to do as the Conservatives would have us do, to create a black hole for future years, will put those services in danger. This is a budget to protect and help the most vulnerable in North Tyneside, and it also looks beyond just this year, and it's part of strategic planning to maintain and develop those services, which we do to an excellent level, and make sure that those services will be there for our residents in future years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Early. Can I bring in Mayor Redfern?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. I would just like to thank all the officers who've been responsible and my cabinet people for bringing this budget in. It is a budget for everybody in this borough. It does all sorts of things. It helps the needy, it helps the jobs, it supports businesses, and at the end of the day, we have to actually be responsible for those who are less fortunate ourselves, to be quite honest. And when we talk about this new caring Tory party, this is wonderful, isn't it? I'll go back to the last time when the Labour control brought in free breakfast for young children. You remember? Children who are going to school hungry, still do, some of them. And we brought in the free breakfast. And what happened with the caring Conservatives? They came into power and they stopped it. So don't tell me, after all the experiences I had working with some of them and what they've done in the past, that this is a new caring people's budget. Let's be honest, to be quite honest. At the end of the day, the residents of North Tyneside know exactly who's on their side, and that's the Labour administration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mayor Redfern. Can I bring in Councillor Davis?
Thank you, Chair. This is a sensible budget. It's a robust budget. It ensures services for the future. It looks forward, and as the Mayor said, we just don't know what's going to be happening with this pandemic. It changes on a daily, weekly basis. This crisis has been life-changing for everybody, and we need to be prudent. We need to look for the future. The North Tyneside community are depending on us. I volunteer and see firsthand how people have relied on our services and how they've congratulated the council on how they've maintained everything and kept everything going. We don't want to be we don't want to have a black hole, as Mr. Early said, and we don't want to have to next year be looking for even more out of the budget reserves to try and get by. We just need to be sensible. We need to keep going, and that's exactly what people need in a crisis: is good consistency and knowing that we're there for them and we've got their back. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Do you have anybody else that wishes to speak to the substantive motion? No. Can I now bring in Councillor Clinton with his right to reply?
Thank you, Chair. I did write a right to reply, but I would just be repetitive if I started reading it out. Can I thank everybody who took part in the debate on both sides of the house, both sides of the chamber, sorry. It's been an excellent debate. I will be repetitive to what the Mayor said, to thank the staff, especially the finance staff. Year on year, as long as I've been the Cabinet of Finance, they've struggled to try and bring a budget in online, and they've done an excellent job, as I have tonight. But I'm not just going to thank them. There's other officers within the council, in fact most of the council staff, as somebody said before, who've really done a sterling job. So therefore, Chair, rather than be repetitive, I'd just like to go straight to the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. I will now take a recorded named vote on the substantive motion, and the vote will be on the basis of a simple majority. So can I ask Mr. Roberts, can you please conduct the named vote on the Cabinet's proposals? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So can I ask Councillor Alan Percy, are you in favour or against the budget as proposed?
In favour.
Councillor Alison Austin, for or against?
Against.
Councillor Andy Newman.
For.
Councillor Anthony McMullen.
For.
Councillor Brian Burdis.
For.
Councillor Bruce Pickard.
Very much for.
Councillor Carl Johnson.
For.
Councillor Carol Burdis.
For.
Councillor Kath Davis.
For.
Councillor Davy Drummond.
For.
Councillor Debbie Cox.
For.
Councillor Eddie Dark.
For.
Councillor Erin Parker-Leonard.
For.
Councillor Frank Lott.
For.
Councillor Gary Bell.
For.
Councillor Gary Madden. Councillor Madden, I'm conscious I've seen a note from you which says you can't get back in the room. I will come back to you in a moment if that's okay with you. Councillor Janet Hunter.
For.
Councillor Janice Mole.
For.
Councillor Jim Allen.
For.
Councillor Joan Walker.
For.
Councillor Joanne Cassidy.
For.
Councillor Joe Kerwin.
For.
Councillor John Hunter.
For.
Councillor John O'Shea.
For.
Councillor John Sterling.
For.
Councillor Judith Wallace.
Against.
Councillor Julie Cruddas.
For.
Councillor Karen Clark.
For.
Councillor Karen Lee.
For.
Councillor Ken Barry.
Against.
Councillor Lewis Bartoli.
Against.
Councillor Linda Bell.
For.
Councillor Linda Dark.
For.
Councillor Margaret Hall.
For.
Councillor Martin Rankin.
For.
Councillor Matt Wilson.
For.
Councillor Matthew Thirlaway.
For.
Councillor Maureen Madden.
For.
Councillor Muriel Green.
For.
Councillor Naomi Craven.
For.
Councillor Nigel Huscroft.
For.
Mayor Norma Redfern.
For. Sorry about that.
Councillor Pam McIntyre.
Against.
Councillor Pat Oliver.
For.
Councillor Paul Richardson.
For.
Councillor Peter Early.
For.
Councillor Ray Glendon.
For.
Councillor Sandra Graham.
For.
Councillor Sarah Day. We appear to have lost Councillor Day. Councillor Day, can you hear me?
For.
Thank you. Councillor Sean Brockbank.
Most definitely against.
Councillor Steve Cox.
For.
Councillor Stephen Phillips.
For.
Councillor Tommy Mulvenner.
Definitely for.
Councillor Trish Brady.
For.
Councillor Wendy Lott.
For.
And Councillor Willie Samuel.
Most definitely for.
Are there any other councillors available that have not had the opportunity to vote? I believe that we have completely lost Councillor Madden.
Right.
On that basis, Chair, there are 6 votes against the budget and 49 votes in favour of the budget, and therefore the budget is passed.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr Roberts. So therefore, as the budget and council tax have now been approved, the council meeting provisionally scheduled for the 4th of March will no longer be required. That concludes the business for tonight's meeting. Thank you for your attendance and to any members of the public watching the live stream. So good night and stay safe. Thank you.